But I just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan. Of course, Canada's relationship is far more integrated, across the border than Japan's economy is with the United States. But it's still a good, valuable piece of insight. President Trump just made headlines with what he calls the biggest trade deal in US history. Japan, America's longtime ally, agreed to a 15% tariff on its auto exports to the US, down from the 25% that had been threatened earlier this year. In return, Japan pledged a massive $550 billion investment into the US economy, aimed at energy projects, rare earth supply chains, and domestic manufacturing. At first glance, it looks like a classic Trump win. But for trade watchers, and especially Canada, it's something else entirely. The deal with Japan is not the end of a negotiation cycle. It's the opening move in a broader strategy. And now, that strategy is facing resistance. The Japanese, very close allies with the Americans, and they're going to be hit with a 15% tariff. So are we. And the president has basically said, look, no country will be exempt from tariffs. We're not going back to 2 or 3%. There will be a baseline of 10 or 15%, even for close allies. The Japan deal came with terms that raised eyebrows in Ottawa. Despite the flashy investment number, Japan failed to secure the removal of key sectoral tariffs, particularly on steel. Those Section 232 tariffs remain in place, and the 15% auto tariff is still 5 times higher than the rate Japan faced before Trump returned to office in January 2025. For Canada, the implications are serious. If even Japan, with all its leverage, couldn't get a full exemption, then the odds of a no-tariff deal for Canada look slim. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of rushing to follow Japan's lead, Prime Minister Mark Carney is choosing a different path, one that signals confidence, not desperation. His government is now shifting from defense to offense. The goal: if the US insists on keeping baseline tariffs, Canada will push to eliminate the sectoral ones on steel, aluminum, lumber, and autos. And if Trump won't move, then Canada is prepared to act on its own terms. I have no problem, but I don't trust President Trump as far as I can throw him. He constantly changes his mind. It's, you just don't know who you're dealing with. This isn't just a federal effort. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, speaking from Huntsville, put it plainly: Canada buys more from the US than Japan ever will, $349 billion a year compared to Japan's $79 billion, based on US Census data from 2024. Canada isn't a minor partner. It's the customer that pays the bills. Across the provinces, that sentiment is catching on. From Alberta to Nova Scotia, premiers are pushing for deeper domestic production of steel, clean energy, and critical minerals. There's growing investment in SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors, and new energy pipelines that bypass US dependency altogether. Canada's message is simple: if Washington won't ease the pressure, Ottawa and the provinces will make sure Canada no longer needs to ask. He's our friend, and I don't consider Americans the enemy. But right now, President Trump himself is acting like the enemy. The Trump administration has used tariffs to pressure partners into action, but this time the strategy might backfire. In recent months, Canada has quietly built economic leverage of its own. Imports of American steel and alcohol are already down. Tourism to the US has fallen by more than 60% since the first round of tariffs in March 2025, according to Statistics Canada. That's not just political protest. It's real economic impact. Now, as Trump promotes the Japan deal as a model for future negotiations, Ottawa is studying it closely, not to copy, but to counter. The logic is clear. If Trump demands concessions to secure investment, Canada can demand fairness in return for access. And if that doesn't happen, Carney's team is preparing for a selective pushback through tariffs, market diversification, and regulatory shifts that affect US companies operating in Canada. Trump's deal with Japan was supposed to set the tone. Instead, it may have triggered a new dynamic. Canada is no longer simply reacting to tariffs. It's rewriting the rules of engagement. Mark Carney isn't chasing a deadline, he's building leverage. And across Canada, premiers are reinforcing that stance. With pipelines, with manufacturing, and with a growing appetite to reduce dependence on US markets. August 1st is the next marker in this negotiation. But for once, it's not just Trump setting the terms. Canada is now playing its own game, and it's doing it with eyes wide open. Consumer boycotts are the reason that President Trump and some of his team have referred to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with. Ontario's premier says Canada needs to match President Donald Trump's tariffs dollar for dollar. Donald Trump doesn't usually hold back, but this time, his words triggered something deeper than political drama. Standing before a crowd of business leaders in Washington, his hand-picked ambassador to Canada explained why Trump sees Canadians as mean and nasty to deal with, not because of military threats or major trade violations, but because Canadians are quietly boycotting US travel and refusing to buy American alcohol. On the surface, it sounded like a throwaway insult. But what it revealed was something far more telling, that the Canadian public's grassroots reaction, one without protests or megaphones, was working. It began with tariffs. Steel, lumber, aluminum, sectors deeply tied to Canadian jobs, were suddenly slapped with high US duties in early 2025. Then came the rhetoric. Trump's remarks about Canada taking advantage of America sparked anger and confusion. Instead of shouting back, Canadians changed their habits. By July 2025, according to data from international travel platforms like Hopper and Expedia, flights from Canada to the US dropped by over 26%. Alberta and British Columbia led the decline. Meanwhile, Canadian liquor boards from Ontario to Quebec reported a dramatic drop in American alcohol sales. In some cases, shelves were restocked entirely with domestic or European brands. At the same time, retail movements like Buy Canadian surged. Independent shops across Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver said their sales of Canadian-made goods had doubled compared to the same period last year. What started as a reaction became a movement, and it got Washington's attention. Obviously, Canadians are outraged. I say, Canadians, stick with it. Hold the line. BC Premier David Eby says Hoekstra's remarks show Canada's efforts to stand up to Trump are, quote, having an impact. If Trump thought provinces would buckle under pressure, he misread the room. British Columbia Premier David Eby publicly challenged the tone coming out of Washington. He didn't just defend the boycott, he said it was proof that Canadians were finally being heard. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford took a different but equally firm approach. Instead of backing down, he called on Ottawa to respond with equal tariffs, dollar for dollar. In his words, showing weakness would only invite more pressure. Across the political spectrum, premiers aligned on one message. Canadians have the right to protect their economy and sovereignty, even if that means spending differently. We should note, to our friends and neighbors in Canada, the Granite State sends you our greetings and, says, we miss you. The ambassador's comments may have sparked outrage, but not everyone in the US echoed that tone. Just days later, a bipartisan group of US senators visited Ottawa. Unlike the ambassador, they didn't criticize Canadians. They expressed concern. New Hampshire's Maggie Hassan and Nevada's Catherine Cortez Masto noted how their states were already feeling the pain. Canadian tourism was down, shopping districts were quieter, and hospitality jobs were at risk. In Nevada alone, Canadians usually account for 30% of international visitors. That number has sharply declined this summer, and with it, millions in revenue. What Canadians chose to do with their vacation dollars was no longer a small matter. It was reshaping cross-border economics. Many in Ottawa say Trump's rhetoric just strengthens their resolve to buy Canadian and boycott travel down south. Some might say skipping a trip or switching a brand is too small to matter. But collectively, these choices created pressure, the kind that even Trump's administration couldn't ignore. This wasn't about emotion. It was about agency. Canadians didn't need to shout. Their wallet spoke for them. And if those choices made them seem mean and nasty, then perhaps that label was never really an insult, but a sign of strength. I think Trump is Trump, and, we listen to him and then we just let what he says go through one ear and out the other. In the end, this moment isn't about diplomatic language. It's about posture. Trump may dominate headlines, but Canada, quietly and collectively, is demonstrating resolve. Not through threats, not through deals, but through everyday decisions made by people, provinces, and premiers to stand their ground, protect what's theirs, and define what kind of neighbor they choose to be. Because if mean and nasty means refusing to bow under pressure, then Canada is wearing it well. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says a proposal for a new oil pipeline in Canada is highly likely. Look, the bottom line is, a new East-West Coast pipeline in Canada is good for Canadians. It's good for world markets, in that we have access to more supply. But for the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is heading overseas. As President Trump ramps up tariffs against Canada, Ottawa is responding not with speeches or countermeasures, but with something far more strategic. For the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is being shipped directly to Asia, bypassing the United States entirely. At the same time, a new cross-country pipeline is being fast-tracked. It's not retaliation. It's leverage, and it could reshape the balance of power in North America's energy and trade relationship. In early July, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed what many had suspected: Canada is moving ahead with a proposed pipeline connecting Alberta's oil fields to the Pacific coast. This east-west pipeline would allow Canadian oil to bypass American refineries entirely, a strategic shift at a time when U.S. tariffs are rising. According to former U.S. Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette, Canada's push is more than economic, it's political. With American refiners buying most of Canada's oil, the country has long been boxed in. This pipeline could change that. But oil isn't the only focus. In British Columbia, Canada has now shipped its first cargo of liquefied natural gas to North Asia. The $40 billion project, the largest private investment in Canadian history, has capacity for 14 million tons annually, and it could double. Suddenly, Canada is no longer just exporting energy to the United States. It's entering the global market. Well, it addresses two key priorities, for the current government. 1. Trade diversification, which is the new mantra in response to Trump's tariffs, it fits into that. It also fits into the other objective of Canada becoming an energy superpower. Why does this matter now? Because nearly 97% of Canada's oil and gas exports still go to the US. That's been a long-standing vulnerability. It means lower prices, less production, and no access to rising demand overseas. But LNG is shifting that. Asia now accounts for over 70% of global LNG demand. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and China are looking to cut coal use and need reliable natural gas. Canada, with its Pacific coastline, has a key advantage. A tanker from British Columbia reaches Asia in half the time it takes from the US Gulf Coast. That means Canada can compete and win. If this shift continues, Canada could significantly reduce its reliance on American buyers. And in a trade negotiation, that matters. It changes the power dynamic. Because if Trump continues to use tariffs as pressure, Canada now has an option: redirect supply away from the US, not just in theory, but in real volume. This is no longer a bluff. It's infrastructure in motion. The North Asia story, the project comes as Canada looks to diversify its trading relationships outside of the US. The United States might be the world's top oil producer, with a record 13.4 million barrels per day in July 2025, according to the Energy Information Administration. But production is only one part of the equation. Delivery is another. America still faces challenges building the pipeline capacity needed to move that oil. It also relies heavily on stable imports from Canada to balance refining needs, especially in the Midwest and Northeast. If Canada cuts or diverts supply, US refiners could face higher costs. Consumers could see higher fuel prices. Even more, industries tied to energy, like electric vehicles, heavy manufacturing, and construction, could feel the pressure. Canada's new LNG routes, if fully scaled, could also undercut future US export ambitions. While the Trump administration promotes its own Alaska LNG project, it's years behind. By the time American gas reaches Asia, Canadian cargo may already be there. Trump's tariffs were meant to corner Canada, but they may have pushed it to finally break free. Pipelines and LNG terminals don't respond to tweets. They reshape long-term leverage. And this time, it's Canada laying down the infrastructure, not just the rhetoric. As natural gas flows westward and oil bypasses old routes, the question isn't whether Trump will escalate. It's whether the US is ready for a trade war, where energy is the counterpunch.